Ladies, let me tell you something about a man who chooses to ignore a woman, especially a good woman, a woman who shows up, who communicates, who cares. When a man ignores you, it might feel like he's got the upper hand, like he's making some kind of power move. But truth be told, that silence reveals way more about his weakness than his strength. When a man ignores you, it's easy to think he's in control, that maybe he's got something going on. Maybe he's not that into you, or maybe you did something wrong. But what you need to understand is that a man who chooses to ignore a woman, especially a woman who's been consistent, present, and giving, is not showing strength. He's revealing his greatest weakness. Because it doesn't take power to disappear. It takes weakness to stay silent in the face of love, vulnerability, and truth. A man ignoring you is often a man who doesn't know how to handle the emotions you bring out in him. You make him feel something, and that something might be too intense, too unfamiliar, too demanding of his honesty. It's not that you're too much, it's that he hasn't grown enough. Instead of leaning in, he pulls back. Instead of expressing what's on his mind, he shuts down. And when he does that, it's not a test of your worth. It's a sign of his own internal battle, one that he hasn't figured out how to face. Men are taught to be tough. Don't cry, don't talk about feelings, handle it. But love isn't something you can handle with silence. Love calls for courage. It asks you to show up even when it's hard. So when a man ghosts you, backs off, or simply refuses to acknowledge your presence, he's not showing strength. He's dodging the very thing that could have made him better. You were trying to build, to understand, to connect. He chose to disconnect, thinking that ignoring you would keep him in control. But what he doesn't realize is that every second of silence chips away at the foundation you were willing to build with him. The irony is that while he's trying to create space, trying to protect his ego or avoid discomfort, he's also slowly sabotaging his chances with you. Because a woman who knows her value isn't going to chase after silence. She might question it at first. She might reach out, trying to make sense of it, but eventually she'll stop. And that's where his weakness becomes undeniable. Because now he's alone. Not because she didn't care, but because he didn't have the strength to care back. He didn't have the maturity to say what needed to be said. And that's the kind of weakness no man can hide from. Men often think walking away gives them power, that ignoring a woman will make her miss him, make her wonder, make her chase. And yes, maybe for a little while she will. But not forever, because deep down, women don't want to chase someone who doesn't acknowledge their worth. They want to be chosen, not questioned. They want a man who communicates, not one who vanishes when things get real. So while he's sitting in silence, thinking he's in charge, he's actually showing you everything you need to know. He's telling you without saying a word that he doesn't have what it takes to be the kind of man you need. A protector, a communicator, a partner. And here's what really gets him in the end. When he finally looks around and sees that you're no longer waiting, no longer texting, no longer trying, regret kicks in. Because the silence that gave him control is now the silence that surrounds him. The messages have stopped. The phone doesn't buzz. Your presence, once taken for granted, is gone, and now he's left wondering what happened. What happened is simple. You woke up to his weakness. You realize that someone who truly values you doesn't ignore you. Someone who's truly interested shows up. Someone who has the emotional depth doesn't run when things get serious. The greatest weakness of a man who ignores you is that he chooses comfort over connection. He chooses ego over vulnerability. He chooses fear over truth. And in doing so, he loses something that was actually rare. He loses the kind of woman who would have stood by him if only he had shown up. But silence was his choice. Distance was his decision. and now. He gets to sit with the consequences of that decision. You see, ignoring someone isn't a neutral act. It's a loud message wrapped in quiet behavior. It says, I'm not ready. I'm not willing. I'm not brave enough. It's not your job to fix that. It's not your role to keep proving you're worth attention. The moment he goes silent is the moment his weakness takes the spotlight, not yours. He didn't break you. He exposed himself. And in time, that's something even he won't be able to ignore. When a man starts ignoring you, it can stir up all kinds of questions. You begin wondering what changed, what you did wrong, or what made him pull away. But what's happening in that silence isn't about your flaws, it's about his. The act of ignoring isn't a strength. It's not some mysterious calculated power move. It's a clear signal of emotional weakness. A man who truly knows himself, who is emotionally mature and secure, doesn't go quiet when things get complicated. He doesn't disappear when feelings deepen. He doesn't ghost when you show your heart. He steps up, he speaks, he respects. But when a man doesn't have those qualities, the first thing he does is retreat into silence. There's a common misconception that a man who ignores a woman holds the upper hand, that his distance somehow makes him more desirable. But here's the truth. When a man ignores a woman who's been nothing but genuine with him, he's not holding power, he's losing it. He's not making her chase him, he's creating space for her to realize she deserves more. In his attempt to appear unaffected or in control, he ends up revealing his emotional immaturity, because real connection takes more than charm and attraction. It takes effort, consistency, and communication. A man who can't even offer that is not in control of anything but his own avoidance. What's truly dangerous about this kind of silence is that it often makes a woman question herself. She'll replay conversations in her head. She'll analyze every detail, wondering where she went wrong. But the truth is, silence doesn't mean you failed. It means he wasn't capable of showing up for you in the way that you showed up for him. And that's his weakness. Because it doesn't take courage to walk away when things feel unfamiliar. It takes courage to stay and grow, to talk through the messy, confusing emotions, to be vulnerable. But he chooses the easy road. He chooses absence over honesty. Sometimes men ignore women not because they don't care, but because they care and don't know how to handle it. That still doesn't make it right, because being unable to process your emotions doesn't give you permission to disregard someone else's. It's not love if it hurts in silence. It's not connection if it requires guessing games. A man who chooses to ignore you when you needed clarity, communication, or closure is showing you everything you need to know. He's showing you that he doesn't yet have the emotional capacity to be a true partner. He's showing you that your love, your presence, your energy, it's all too powerful for the version of him that's still hiding from his own feelings. But here's the twist. While he's sitting in his silence, trying to maintain distance and control, something starts to happen. You begin to heal. You begin to realize that the problem wasn't your love. It was where you invested it. You begin to feel lighter without the confusion, the waiting, the emotional guessing game. And once you've tasted that peace, going back to someone who couldn't even offer you a conversation becomes unthinkable. That's when the silence he used to protect himself becomes the silence that haunts him. Eventually, time exposes the reality. That man, the one who ignored you, starts to miss the energy you brought into his life. Not just your looks, not just the physical part, but the way you cared, the way you listened, the way you supported him. And he starts to realize he had something rare. But now that silence, that wall he put up, that avoidance, it cost him that something rare. And he'll look around and wonder why it doesn't feel the same with anyone else. Because what you gave him wasn't ordinary. And he let it go without even putting up a fight. The tragedy for a man who ignores a woman of value is that by the time he realizes what he lost, she's already moved on. She's already done the hard work of healing. She's already learned how to give all that love to herself. And when she finally reaches that place of strength, the version of her he once knew no longer exists. She's stronger, wiser, more selective, and she doesn't entertain silence anymore. She doesn't give her time to men who can't communicate. She doesn't chase anyone who walks away without a word. So while he may think his silence gave him control, it actually handed you the freedom to rise. His greatest weakness wasn't the silence itself. It was thinking that silence wouldn't cost him anything. But love always costs something when you don't treat it right. So now he's the one left behind, staring at a phone that doesn't ring, looking at your pictures with memories he can't relive, watching you grow without him. And all of that because he didn't have the courage to speak, to stay, or to step up. Ignoring a woman who is ready to give you her heart isn't a reflection of her worth. It's a reflection of your own unreadiness. A man who chooses silence over effort, avoidance over truth, and pride over partnership will always lose in the end. Because women who know their value eventually stop entertaining men who don't. When a man ignores you, it often creates a storm of emotion inside. You begin to doubt yourself, asking what you did wrong, where things shifted, and why he suddenly pulled away. But that moment of silence, that calculated or confused distance, doesn't say anything about your worth. It says everything about his emotional capability. It reveals a deeper weakness, a flaw that's often covered by ego, distraction, or pride. Ignoring someone doesn't require strength. What it requires is a lack of accountability. And when a man chooses to ignore rather than engage, he's proving that he's not ready to handle real intimacy, real feelings, or a real woman. It's common to believe that when a man starts ignoring you, it's some kind of game, that maybe he wants you to miss him, that maybe you should try harder, that you should prove your value. But a man who ignores a woman who genuinely cares about him is making a decision. He's deciding to disconnect instead of deepen the relationship. He's deciding to prioritize control over communication. And in doing so, he's not gaining strength. He's exposing a weakness that goes far beyond the surface. Because the strongest thing a man can do is be honest. Honest with himself and honest with the woman who's invested in him. When he goes silent, it creates confusion. You start searching for closure, clinging to hope, rereading old messages, remembering all the good moments. But eventually clarity sets in. You realize that silence is an answer too. It's just not the answer you were hoping for. It's the answer that says he didn't know how to show up for you. It says he didn't know how to match your vulnerability, that his emotional vocabulary is limited, that when it was time to step up, he chose to step back. And that's not power, that's avoidance, that's fear. And that's the type of weakness that no man can dress up with charm or status. Ignoring someone doesn't make you mysterious. It doesn't make you desirable. What it makes you is absent, unreliable, and emotionally unavailable. And the sad part is most men who do this don't even realize what they're giving up. They think that silence keeps their pride intact, but what it really does is burn bridges that could have led to something real. A man who ignores a woman is not just walking away from a relationship. He's walking away from growth, because every relationship has the power to transform us, to show us who we are, to challenge us to love better. And when a man refuses to engage in that process, he remains stuck in a cycle of surface-level interactions that never require his full self. Meanwhile, the woman he ignored is forced to confront a painful truth, that her love, her attention, her presence wasn't appreciated. And in the beginning, that truth hurts. It stings. Because she didn't see it coming. She thought the bond was deeper. She thought the connection was mutual. But eventually something powerful happens. She begins to understand that the silence wasn't a rejection of her worth. It was a reflection of his limits. She sees the red flags she missed. She remembers the inconsistencies. She realizes she was overextending herself for someone who wouldn't even offer her basic respect. And in that realization, she begins to heal. There's a turning point where a woman moves from confusion to clarity, where she stops waiting for a message that will never come, where she stops hoping he'll change, where she stops lowering her standards just to feel wanted. And when that shift happens, everything changes. The power dynamic flips, because the woman he once ignored is no longer the same. She's wiser, more grounded, less willing to accept emotional crumbs. And that's when he starts to notice her absence. That's when regret creeps in. He realizes he lost someone who genuinely cared, someone who showed up, someone who brought peace, love, and authenticity into his life. But by the time he understands what he lost, she's already gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. She's detached. She's healed. She's moved forward. And no amount of apology or charm can erase the fact that he ignored her when it mattered most. What he thought would make her chase him only ended up making her see him more clearly, not as a man in control, but as a man who lacked the courage to confront love head on. That's the greatest weakness of a man who ignores you, his inability to face what's real, his inability to communicate like a grown man, his inability to appreciate something meaningful when it's right in front of him. And the price he pays isn't just losing you. It's having to live with the memory of what he gave up. Because long after you've moved on, he'll still be wondering, still be checking your profile, still be hoping for a second chance. But the door he closed with silence is the same one that won't open again. And that's the weight of silence. It might seem small in the moment, but it leaves a permanent imprint. A man's silence says, I'm not ready. It says, I'm not capable. It says, I'd rather lose you than face myself. And when you walk away from that, you're not walking away from love. You're walking away from weakness disguised as power. And that in itself is your strength. When a man chooses to ignore a woman who genuinely cared about him, he believes in that moment that silence is strength. He thinks stepping back without explanation protects his pride, keeps him in control, and shields him from emotional vulnerability. But what he fails to realize is that in those moments of silence, when he turns away instead of leaning in, he is not proving strength, he is showcasing his greatest weakness. Because it doesn't take courage to walk away from something beautiful. It takes courage to face it, nurture it, and grow with it. And when a man ignores a woman who is trying to build with him, he isn't being stoic. He is being emotionally unavailable, emotionally immature, and emotionally avoidant. Most men who ignore women believe they're staying in power. They think that pulling away forces the woman to chase. But what they don't understand is that women of substance, women who know their value, don't chase silence. At first, yes, she might reach out. She might try to understand what went wrong. She might ask for clarity. But there comes a moment when she realizes she's no longer begging for communication. She's observing a man who has shut a door. And that realization doesn't weaken her, it wakes her up. The silence that once confused her now begins to speak loud and clear. It tells her that she was loving someone who didn't know how to love back. Men who ignore women often do so out of fear. Fear of commitment, fear of getting too close, fear of being seen. When a man sees a woman who is emotionally open, who is clear about what she wants, who holds space for connection, it challenges him. It asks him to grow up, to meet her at her level. And if he's not ready, instead of rising to the occasion, he retreats. That retreat isn't power. It's the inability to deal with the emotional mirror she holds up. A woman's love can reveal to a man just how much inner work he hasn't done, and that reflection can be uncomfortable. So instead of confronting that discomfort, he avoids it. He ghosts her. He disappears. He becomes silent. But silence isn't neutral. It's a decision. And that decision says far more about him than it ever will about her. The woman left behind in silence is not broken. She's not weak. She's not needy. She's someone who showed up fully, who was willing to communicate, love, and invest. And though the silence hurts, it also teaches. It teaches her what kind of man not to give her heart to again. It shows her the importance of emotional availability. It helps her spot the red flags she once overlooked. That experience, though painful, becomes a turning point because over time she realizes that being ignored doesn't define her, it defines him. The weakness of a man who ignores is that he thinks time and distance will erase the truth. But what time does is bring clarity. It reveals the effort that was one-sided. It highlights the emotional labor the woman carried alone. It makes her stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And by the time he finally feels the weight of her absence, she's no longer waiting. She's no longer hoping. She's no longer accessible. That's the real consequence of his silence. Not that she moved on physically, but that she moved on emotionally. She detached. She stopped making excuses for him. She let go of the story she had built in her mind, and she started writing a new one where she no longer had to beg for consistency or wonder about her worth. And yet the man who ignored her will eventually feel that silence echo back at him. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually he'll scroll through her pictures, remember her laugh, recall the way she supported him, and it'll hit him. He lost someone real. And not because she walked away on her own, but because he pushed her away with silence. He'll come to understand that what he thought was strength, holding back, staying distant, was actually the weakness that cost him someone who would have stood by him through anything if only he had the strength to stand with her. Some men confuse silence with power because they've never been taught how to express themselves. But that's no excuse. We live in a time where emotional intelligence is no longer optional. If you want to keep a real woman, you have to learn how to speak, how to listen, how to show up. And a man who chooses not to grow in those areas will keep losing women who would given him everything. It's not a coincidence. It's a result of weakness disguised as pride. When you ignore a woman who loves you, you gamble everything on the hope that she'll stay, that she'll wait, that she'll try harder. But eventually that woman stops showing up, she stops answering, she stops caring, because love doesn't live where there's no response, doesn't survive where it's not acknowledged. And in that moment, he will realize the cost of his silence was not just her attention, it was her presence, her affection, her belief in him. And once that's gone, it doesn't come back the same. So while he thought ignoring her was strength, it turned out to be the exact thing that showed his biggest weakness. He couldn't handle her. He couldn't grow with her. He couldn't meet her in her truth. And so he lost her. Not because she stopped loving him, but because he never gave her a reason to stay.